Welcome to The Point. This is part 3 of a 4-part series, The Coming Financial Storm. We have with us an expert who spent all his professional life as a personal financial advisor and been in the banking system and also in the insurance world. I'd like to introduce you straight away to Graham Bridger, close friend of mine. Graham, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Richard.
It's good to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here.
When we finished the last programme, we were talking about the illusion. I'm not going to talk a great deal because Graham knows a great deal more about this than I do, but basically the world is drowning in debt, and yet this is not well reported in the news. People simply don't realise it. And Graham was telling us all about how we live in a fiat money system, and I'll ask him to carry on from there, if I may, Graham.
Thank you, Richard. Well, in the last programme, we were talking about the fact that money, as we understand it, is nothing more than a piece of paper, and it's backed with something. Up until 1971, it was backed by a real asset, which was gold. Mm-hmm. And since 1971, the whole world has moved onto a paper-based system. Now, people spend money every day thinking nothing of it, but money has to have an asset backing of some sort. Mm. And the only one that we now have is a government backing. So in other words, all countries of the world have now shifted away from any real value in money, and it's all based on whether a government is willing to back its money. Mm. And of course, as we understood, governments don't have any money, so it's based on the population and the tax we pay. So in the end, it's us that's backing money. Right. And so with a fiat currency system, we are now heading to what I would say is a complete loss of belief in the money system. And that's why, in a sense, we're moving towards a point where paper currency could start losing considerable value right across the world and will have to be replaced by something. I say to people on the conferences that I've been doing recently that financial services has effectively become the god of this age. Yeah. And let's just listen in this next very short clip of a news item that was actually on the BBC News in 2011. I happened to actually be watching it live when it happened and got a clip of it.
Oh, right.
Goldman Sachs does not care about this rescue package, neither does the big funds. So actually, what I would actually tell people, I want to help people. People can make money from this. It isn't just traders. What they need to do is learn about how to make money from a downward market. The first thing people should do is protect their assets, protect what they have. My prediction is that savings of millions of people is going to vanish, and this is just the beginning. So I would say be prepared and act now. The biggest risk people can take right now is not acting. I would say this to everybody who's watching this. This economic crisis is like a cancer. If you just wait and wait thinking this is going to go away, just like a cancer, it's going to grow and it's going to be too late. What I would say to everybody is get prepared. This is not a time right now to wishful thinking the government is going to sort things out. The governments don't rule the world. Goldman Sachs.
Welcome back to The Point. We're discussing the world financial storm coming, and with us is Graham Bridger. And Graham, I'm going to ask you straight away to explain to us carry on explaining about the fiat debt system, the fiat money system, the world debt, and the Federal Reserve in particular. Perhaps you could tell us all about that.
Okay. Well, again, without reiterating the same point, the illusion that we have is that money is real, and the central banks of the world are actually the ones who are controlling the monetary system. Mm. So, for example, in that clip, that was a trader who the BBC made the mistake of putting on the news, on the mainline news one night, because the following days the papers very quickly said that he was basically a bit bonkers and he shouldn't have been allowed on. But when you understand that Goldman Sachs is one of the major banks that in the world, they are referred to quite often by many people as the giant vampire squid. And, that picture says a lot. They've got their tentacles into everything. And when you realise that over the last 6 years in this crisis, governments, and particularly in Europe, people have actually found that people like Mario Draghi, they're being replaced, democratic governments are being replaced by Goldman Sachs bankers. So they are now in place all over. In America, we think of the Federal Reserve as being part of government, whereas nothing could be further from the truth. The Federal Reserve is actually a private bank owned, all the shares are owned by 12 private banks. And they are there specifically for, they say, to govern the economy. They're not. They're there to look after the banks. And in the central banks throughout the world are in the same situation. So what we've actually got is we've got a situation developing where private banks have been allowed, private central banks have been allowed to take control of the monetary system, and a Congress, which is supposedly meant to control American Federal Reserve, has very little control. And when you look back in history, it's quite staggering to realise that, OK, we're in this crisis, but you can look back over famous presidents of the United States right the way through history, right back to George Washington, and you can see what they had to say about the monetary system. And I've just done another short clip here, which will actually give you just an indication of 2 or 3 of famous presidents of the United States.
All the perplexities, confusions and distresses in America arise not from the defects in the Constitution or Confederation, not from want of honour or virtue, as much as from downright ignorance of the nature of coin, credit and circulation. John Quincy Adams, 6th President of the United States of America. I see in the near future a crisis approaching that unnerves me, causes me to tremble for the safety of my country. Corporations have been enthroned, and an era of corruption in high places will follow. And the money power of the country will endeavour to prolong its reign by working upon the prejudices of the people until all wealth is aggregated in a few hands, and the Republic is destroyed. I feel at this moment more anxiety for the safety of my country than ever before, even in the midst of war. God grant that my suspicions may prove groundless. Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States of America. But if in the pursuit of the means we should unfortunately stumble again on unfunded paper money or any similar species of fraud, we shall assuredly give a fatal stab to our national credit in its infancy. Paper money will invariably operate in the body of politics as spirit liquors on the human body. They prey on the vitals and ultimately destroy them. Paper money has had the effect in your state that it will ever have, to ruin commerce, to oppress the honest, open the door to every species of fraud and injustice. George Washington, 1st President of the United States of America.
Welcome back to The Point. Graham Bridges explained to us all about fiat money and the world financial system. I'm not going to stand in the way. Graham, please carry on.
Well, I think you'll see, Richard, that it is quite astounding when you just look at 3 of the presidents. On my website, I've probably got 8 or 9. And in fact, you can get a lot more quotes than that. But you'll see that all the time what they're trying to say is that they're in a battle. They've been in a battle with the banking system for hundreds of years. And the question is, who wins? Interestingly, if you look back through history, you'll discover that those presidents that actually stood against central banks and the Central Reserve banks were presidents who actually were assassinated. The last one who stood against the central bank, as far as we know, the Central Reserve Bank in America, was John Kennedy. And after his death, his brother Robert Kennedy vowed to do the same. Now, you can say these are conspiracy theories, there's no way of proving them one way or another. But if you look at the policies that they were intending to follow through, there's every reason to suspect that there is some truth. So these presidents have been saying that you cannot have an unfunded paper monetary system that has no backing. And it is fraudulent. That's the words that they use. And that is the system we're in. You know, when I've looked in my research and I look across the board, I've looked at economists, politicians, various people in business, fairly high-profile people. Quite often they're people that are now no longer in positions of power, hence the fact they feel able to speak. And in the next clip, we'll be able to see just three of them. One of them is somebody called Karen Houdis, who she's recently presented a case in the last few years to the US Congress and to UK government. And she was in the World Bank. She was legal counsel to the World Bank. And she speaks about the rule of law. Dr. Craig Roberts, who was Assistant Treasury Secretary to the Reagan administration, he writes regularly about the road of corruption that we're now on. And a Dr. Pippa Malmgren, who's been in very prominent positions and especially advising presidents. And it's very interesting to listen to these three of these people in the next video clip.
If you were still at the US Treasury and President Obama came to you tomorrow and said, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, I want you to give me a plan of action to get us back onto an even keel, what would you advise him to do right now?
The deregulation of the financial system on the mistaken belief that markets were self-regulating. This was a strategic error, unimaginable size, because out of that didn't come libertarian nirvana. We got crony capitalism. We got gangster capitalism. And when they get so big and they're so important to keep afloat, they become unaccountable. We have individual U.S. banks who have derivative exposure greater than world gross domestic product. This is nonsensical. It makes no sense whatsoever. Obviously, markets are not self-regulated. This came about because of the irresponsible, thoughtless, mindless financial deregulation.
Is Dr. Pippa Malmgren. She headed the global asset management businesses for Bankers Trust in Asia out of Hong Kong and was also chief currency strategist for Bankers Trust Company and deputy head of global investment strategy at one point at UBS. She was also senior consultant to Deutsche Bank. She was also assistant to the President of the United States for Economic Policy on the National Economic Council and former member of the U.S. President's Working Group on Financial Markets. I had to stop your bio there, Pippa, because it's too long to read it all on the air.
You're very kind.
Pippa, you've written about expropriation very recently, which is basically theft through inflation, right, and some other tactics. Can you talk about that for the listeners globally?
Well, I think, look, we're in a world where every major industrialized government doesn't have the funds to deliver on the promises they've made to the public. So they're going to reach for the public's cash in different ways. Some of it is through higher taxation. Some of it is through what I would call expropriation, although taxation and even inflation are a version of that. But I think what we saw in Cyprus, a really overt expropriation, we're going to see it come in lots of different forms. Some of it will be obvious, like Cyprus. Some of it will be subtle, like Portugal. But what's sure is that it's happening.
When you talk about that, really we're talking about theft. And when I spoke with Art Cashin about it, he talked about it violating the rule of law.
Well, yeah, I think that it does come down to very fundamental political relationship between the citizen and the state.
Her name is Karen Houdis. She was with the World Bank for 21 years as a legal attorney. Good morning, Ms. Houdis.
Good morning. There's a wonderful analysis that was done by three mathematicians in Switzerland. They had very accurate data on who owns the corporations and who manages the corporations. I think it's 43,000 transnational corporations. And they found out at the end of the exercise that there is something that they call a super entity. We think of 4 or 5 banks, forget it. Those guys are all merged together, and we saw that during the LIBOR scandal, that they're in collusion. And these big boys are the same ones that control all of the media, because we're talking about a cover-up. The stuff that I was telling Congress immediately should have gone to the public, and it didn't, and it wasn't for lack of trying. I tried desperately. I didn't understand what was going on. I went to all the major newspapers. I've been dealing with these people in different arenas. I didn't realize they were all the same arena, and they were all the same people. I realized it recently.
Well, that's an awakening. So you're talking Washington Post, New York Times, the whole thing?
I am saying that when you turn on a television set, whatever you're seeing has been filtered by those people.
Yes.
So we don't have a democracy here. And that if the United States people didn't find out about this massive corruption, the whole world was going to hell in a handbasket. We were going to have a currency war. We were going to have a currency war that made what happened in the 30s look like nothing. And so I have been testifying in the European Parliament. I have had 2 statements published in the UK Parliament. The Federal Reserve has gained the capital markets. We shouldn't have any investors in there because the Federal Reserve is making money hand over fist on insider trading. This whole country is so corrupt, you can't begin to imagine. And imagine, I can't tell this to the people because the press is owned by those thugs. That's what we're talking about.
Welcome back. Graham's been telling me that according to the Bank of International Settlements, the total debt in the world is $100 trillion. Is that correct, Graham?
Well, yes. We don't actually know what the total world debt is, but we know that America is $200 trillion when you look at the unfunded debt. Mm-hmm. So what we're seeing now is a situation where the debts are so huge that there is no way that they can be dealt with in an ordinary way. Mm. And I think this is what's brought in what we saw before was governments trying to bail out these huge banks. They should have allowed them to go bust. Mm. Actually, we wouldn't have had half the problems in the world now had they done so. Mm. But they've protected their own. They've protected the elite bankers. Now, what we've had is bailouts, but far worse is what was being said on the video there, that we're now going to see and are seeing bail-ins. Mm-hmm. So over the last 2 years, they've been developing legislation in accordance with the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve right across Australia, the whole of Europe, the UK, America, that the regulations are now in line with bankruptcy law, which basically says that if an institution goes bust, then they're going to be allowed to go bust. Now, the public, they say, well, that's jolly good, because we're not going to get called upon. And in that respect, you're right. The big problem is that they own vast amounts of our money. Mm. And when you're bailed in, you might think it'll just be the equity holders and the bond holders, but actually the top of the list is deposit holders. Mm. So you and I might have our money over and above the so-called protected limit, 100,000 euros in Europe, 85,000 in the UK, but actually the rest of it is subject to confiscation. And that's a horrific thought. And nobody realizes that is the situation. And when you listen to videos, for example, of Ben Bernanke before he, just in his last legs as the Fed chairman, he actually is on video saying it. I've actually got a copy of it, which actually says very clearly that the rules are now in place and that they will not be bailing out the big banks. But when you consider that the big banks are now hundreds and hundreds of trillions in derivative debt, that tells you that we need to be seriously on guard about it. So really what we've done is we've moved from a too big to fail, and this is where the question of law comes in. Because as I said in an earlier program, the Bible speaks about the fact that in the end the love of most will go cold and that there'll be wickedness, great wickedness. What it actually, the Greek word is actually lawlessness. And when you hear Karen Hughes from the World Bank, who is a barrister, she said the main issue we're facing is lawlessness. And the lawlessness is taking place at the most senior levels imaginable. So we've now got too big to fail and too big to jail. And the next video clip will just tell you the seriousness of this, because it is Eric Holder, who is the Attorney General, the US Attorney General, being interviewed by Congress where they're questioning him. And he actually tells you very clearly that they're afraid to prosecute.
On the issue of bank prosecution, I'm concerned that we have a mentality of too big to jail in the financial sector, of spreading from fraud cases to terrorist financing and money laundering cases, and I cite HSBC. So I think we're on a slippery slope. I don't have recollection of DOJ prosecuting any high-profile financial criminal convictions in either companies or individuals. Assistant Attorney General Brewer said that one reason why DOJ has not brought these prosecutions is that it reaches out to quote-unquote experts to see what effect the prosecutions would have on the financial markets.
The concern that you have raised is one that I frankly share, and I'm not talking about HSBC now, because that maybe that not be appropriate, but I am concerned that the size of some of these institutions becomes so large that it does become difficult for us to prosecute them when we are hit with indications that if you do prosecute, if you do bring a criminal charge, it will have a negative impact on the national economy, perhaps even the world economy. And I think that is a function of the fact that some of these institutions have become too large. Again, I'm not talking about HSBC. This is just a more general comment. I think it has an inhibiting influence impact on our ability to bring resolutions that I think would be more.
Welcome back to The Point. I'm going to ask Graham straight away to explain all that to us.
Well, the sadness about it is that he's effectively telling you that the corporations and the big banks who control the system are now, you can't jail them. Because they are saying effectively, you do that and the world's economy could come down. And it's very hard to imagine that that isn't blackmail. You know, so with that situation basically facing us, and the fact that we now know that, you know, governments are put in by huge lobbying power. You know, the reason why Congress people get in is simply because there are just billions of corporations being fed into maintaining their position. You know, so what we've now got is we've got a system which is totally lawless. And the lady who spoke, Karen Hudas, is trying to tell us that there is a possibility of bringing law back. It's hard to see, and at the moment, I don't see it. And so we are faced with the fact that not only could you see people losing hundreds of millions of pounds, average people, because as they become more desperate, there's a famous saying, governments will do whatever they have to do to get the money that they need, and it will come from the average person.
Now, this is quite alarming, actually, because what I hear you're saying with this bail-in business is that if I have, certain amount of savings in a bank, for example, and the bank fails, they regard my savings, your savings, as their money.
Yes. Well, actually, the law is that it's their money anyway. When you put money in a bank, people think it's their money. It's not. The moment you put it into a bank, it's their money.
Right.
And they have the right to do what they like with it.
My word.
Which is pretty scary.
This is very scary stuff. By the way, I'm sure you've got questions. I certainly have. We do have an email address for this program, tothepoint@revelationtv.com. If you have any questions for Graham, please send an email to thepoint@revelationtv.com, and I will send them to Graham, and I'm sure he'll be delighted to reply. So, Graham, we've only got a couple of minutes left. Would you like to sort of wind up what you're saying in this part of the program? In the next and last part, we're going to talk about what we should do in light of all that Graham's been telling us this afternoon. Thank you, Graham.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think the next program we're going to be talking about choices. People immediately, when I give conferences and speak, they usually say, well, what do I do? And quite naturally, they're focused on themselves. You know, so initially they're thinking, well, what do I do? But actually, I think the big question is, what do we do?
Right.
So there's issues relating for Christians, and there are issues relating to non-Christians. I'm going to cover these when we come to the next part of the program.
Well, thanks so much for joining us on To The Point. This is quite heavy stuff in a way, but it is really important stuff. I absolutely believe everything that Graham's been saying. I've been following this material in the same way as Graham has, but Graham knows much more about it than I do, because that's why I've got him here. So please write to us at tothepoint@revelationtv.com, and don't miss the last program on what we should do about it, the choices we're going to make. God bless you. Thanks for joining us. Lovely to have you on this program, and we look forward to seeing you at the next program, To The Point, on choices, what we should do about it. God bless.